is Central and Southern Ohio's ancient earthworks designed by indigenous Americans could soon become designated World Heritage Sites.
For almost 2,000 years, they sat in plain sight across Ohio. Giant rings of earth, flawless squares, an octagon big enough to swallow a town. Settlers shrugged, called them old forts, and for 2 centuries nobody looked closer. Then researchers finally measured them properly.
This is being filmed actually from what is known as the observatory mound. The observatory mound, if you can see how this was arranged.
And what they found didn't just rewrite the textbooks. It stopped archaeologists cold, because hidden in the precise angles of this ancient Earth was something its builders should never have been able to know. Something they tracked across the sky for almost 19 years. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The mounds. Everyone walked past. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Ohio. Scattered across the state, mostly along the rivers, there are earthen structures so enormous that, for most of history, nobody could actually see what they were looking at. You stand at the edge of one, and you just see a low ridge of grass-covered dirt running off into the trees. Walk far enough and it curves. Walk farther and it meets another. From the ground, it's almost nothing. From above, it will stop your heart. These are the works of the people we call the Hopewell. And I have to be careful with that word, because Hopewell isn't the name of a tribe or a king or a nation. It's a label archaeologists use for a shared way of living and building and gathering that spread through the Ohio Valley roughly between 100 BCE and 400 CE. The people who raised these walls left no written language behind, no carved names, no royal tomb announcing who was in charge, just the shaped earth, built with a patience we can barely imagine. And for centuries, the people who came after them had no idea what they were standing on.
And what a sea change that must be for indigenous people, to see their ancestors lifted up and inscribed on the World Heritage List. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, is being a small part of that achievement to get those sites on the World Heritage List, because they deserve it.
The fort that was never a fort. When settlers pushed into the Ohio country in the 17 and 1800s, they found these massive earthen walls and reached for the only story that made sense to them. War. Walls mean defense, so the mounds had to be forts, thrown up by some ancient army to keep enemies out. And many of them flatly refused to believe Native Americans could have built any of it. So they invented a fantasy instead, a vanished race of mysterious mound builders who supposedly raised the earthworks and then disappeared. Hold on to that idea, because it did real and lasting harm, and we are going to come back to it. But the fortress theory had a problem you can see for yourself the second you look at the design. A fort is built to keep people out. These earthworks practically usher people in. In many places the walls are low, too low to defend anything. The gaps in them are wide and deliberate, set like ceremonial doorways instead of choke points. The insides open into huge flat plazas. And the shapes themselves, the circles, the squares, the octagons, are far too exact, far too balanced, to be the panicked work of soldiers shoveling dirt before a battle. Something else was happening here. It just took the right tools to prove it. When the machines started looking for most of the 20th century, studying these places meant walking them, measuring by hand, and guessing at everything that farming and city building had already destroyed. Plows shaved the walls down. Roads sliced straight through the enclosures. Whole sections vanished under towns and parking lots. Then the technology caught up, and it was like someone walking into a dark room and turning on a light. One quick thing. Before I show you what that light revealed, do me one fast favor and hit subscribe, because everything from this point on is the part that rewrote how archaeologists understand this entire culture. And it builds to one discovery you'll want to send to someone the second you hear it. Okay. Here it is, LiDAR, laser scanning that strips away trees and buildings to expose the bare skin of the ground. Started revealing faint outlines no person standing in a field could ever notice. Drones and aerial cameras captured the full geometry from overhead. Magnetometers read what was buried without a shovel breaking ground. And when researchers layered it all together, something astonishing happened. For the first time in centuries, they could see these monuments the way their builders may have meant them to be seen. Whole, connected, deliberate. And the clearer the picture became, the more impossible the old explanations looked. A geometry too perfect. First, the scale, because most people picture a few little hills, and they are wrong by an order of magnitude. Some of these complexes cover hundreds of acres. The Newark Earthworks, in their original form, were once among the largest earthen enclosure systems ever built anywhere on the planet. This is engineered land that runs to the horizon. Now, the precision. Modern surveying confirmed these were not rough approximations. The Hopewell laid out nearly perfect circles, squares with carefully measured sides, octagons with consistent repeating angles. And here is the part that genuinely rattled researchers. Some of these forms appear to share the same units of measurement and the same proportions across sites miles apart. Sit with that for a second. You are laying out a circle hundreds of feet across on uneven ground with no metal instruments, no surveyor's scope, no satellite feeding you coordinates. And you are getting it right. Not roughly right, precisely right, over and over. That takes a deep, working command of geometry, handed down and applied with enormous care, centuries before any tool we'd recognize for the job existed here. But the geometry was only the warm-up. The thing that actually stopped the researchers cold was hiding inside that octagon outside Newark. The octagon that watches the moon. Remember what those measurements were pointing at? The thing I promised you at the very start? This is it. The Octagon Earthworks outside Newark is exactly what it sounds like. A giant octagon joined to a large circle, sprawling across so much ground that for years a golf course sat on top of it. Everyone assumed it was just another beautiful shape. Then, in the early 1980s, Ray Hively and Robert Horn set out to test those walls against the sky, charting where the lines pointed on the horizon, season after season, until the pattern could no longer be ignored. And the answer was almost impossible to believe. The octagon is not just geometry, it is an observatory. Its walls are aligned to the moon, and not the simple, obvious part of its behavior. The moon moves through a long rhythm that takes about 18.6 years to complete, drifting out to its most extreme rising and setting points and slowly back again. Those far edges are called lunar standstills. So subtle you would have to watch the horizon across nearly 2 decades to catch them. The octagon's main axis lines up almost exactly with the northernmost rising of the moon at that standstill. Sit with what that means. Tracking an 18.6-year cycle is not something you notice in a season, or even a single lifetime of glancing up. It takes deliberate watching, recorded and passed down across generations, until someone carved that knowledge into the ground at a scale you could walk through. That is not the work of a primitive people. That is astronomy, built in Earth, and one of the finest examples of ancient lunar architecture anywhere on the planet. That was the shock. But it was not the only one. A landscape stitched together. For a long time, each of these sites was treated as its own lonely monument. Newark here, another complex over there, none of them speaking to each other.
But the Ohio History Connection has reached a settlement with Mound Builders Country Club to buy out its lease on the Octagon Earthworks property in Newark.
Newer research suggests that may be exactly backwards. The shared geometry, the shared building methods, the matching artifacts turning up site after site, all of it hints these weren't separate projects, but pieces of one enormous connected ceremonial landscape. There's even a proposal known as the Great Hopewell Road, the idea that long, parallel-walled avenues once linked the major complexes, possibly tying Newark to sites tens of miles away. And here I have to be honest, because this is where firm fact slides into open argument. Shorter segments of those walled roadways are well documented. The full route, how far it ran, whether it truly connected the sites the way some believe, is still debated by archaeologists. The evidence is suggestive, it is not settled, but even the possibility reframes everything. These may not have been scattered mounds, they may have been stations in a single sacred geography, a continent on the move. And then there's what came out of the ground. When archaeologists dug into Hopewell sites, they kept pulling up materials that do not belong to Ohio. Obsidian, volcanic glass from the Rocky Mountains, over 1,000 miles west. Copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, mica from the southern Appalachians, cut into thin, delicate shapes. Sit with that for a second. 2,000 years ago, with no horses, no wheels, no riding, these materials were crossing the better part of a continent to gather right here in Ohio.
This is a prehistoric culture, 2,000 years ago. The Hopewell culture influence was the eastern United States.
Whether people walked those distances themselves or the goods passed hand to hand along vast trading chains, the conclusion is the same. These were destinations, gathering grounds for communities across half of North America, worth a journey of 1,000 miles. And nobody carries volcanic glass and seashells across a continent for nothing. They came for something inside those quiet walls, and we may never know what. What they still can't explain. Now, let me be straight with you, because this is the part that gets twisted the most. For all the lasers and all the surveys, there is still a great deal nobody can explain. How did the Hopewell achieve such precise layouts without the instruments we would assume were essential? How was the labor organized? With little sign of the dense, centralized city, you'd expect to run a project this size? What ceremonies happened inside the enclosures? Why these particular shapes and no others? How did the complexes connect to one another? But those aren't embarrassing holes. They are honest mystery, not invented mystery, the open questions driving the research right now. Every fresh scan answers one and quietly opens two more, which is exactly where the made-up stories try to sneak back in. The stories that aren't true. Because a place this staggering attracts a lot of nonsense, and you deserve to know the difference. You'll hear that nobody knows who built the earthworks. Not true. Archaeologists confidently credit the indigenous Hopewell tradition. The builders left no writing, but unknown and unwritten are not the same thing. You'll hear they were raised by a lost civilization. Atlantis, visitors from the stars, some vanished super race. There is no evidence for any of it, none. And that fantasy of a mysterious mound builder race from earlier? It was never harmless. For generations it was used to strip native peoples of the credit for their ancestors' genius, and to help justify taking the very land those ancestors had shaped. That myth deserves to stay buried. You'll hear that researchers only just discovered the moon alignment. Misleading. That work goes back to the early 1980s, to the two men we started with. Newer technology sharpened their measurements. It did not stumble onto the alignment last year. And you'll hear these were ancient cities. They almost certainly weren't. There's little evidence of dense, permanent settlement inside the walls. They were ceremonial gathering places, used at intervals by people who lived spread across the land. What the Earth remembers. So, what actually shocked the archaeologists? Not a hidden chamber, not a relic in the dark, something far bigger. The slow, undeniable realization that people long dismissed as primitive were master surveyors, astronomers, and engineers, that they tracked the moon across a cycle nearly 19 years long and wrote it into the ground, that they laid flawless geometry across miles of countryside, that they drew an entire continent toward these sacred plains in Ohio. In 2023, the world finally made it official. The Hopewell ceremonial earthworks were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as masterpieces of human creative genius, placed in the same company as Stonehenge and Machu Picchu.
On par with places like the Great Wall of China, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, and the Taj Mahal.
They were never just mounds. They were one of the great achievements of the ancient world, sitting quietly in the American Midwest the entire time, waiting for us to look closely enough to understand.
To include Ohio's incredible monumental earthworks built by ancient American Indians.
A handful of careful measurements started us down that road. We are still walking it. If this changed the way you see what's buried under American soil, subscribe and stick around, because there's a whole forgotten world like this. And we're only getting started, and I want to hear from you. If the Hopewell could follow the moon across nearly 19 years and build that knowledge into the earth, what do you think they were trying to say to whoever came next? Tell me in the comments.